Hi everyone, we are going to start very soon. My name is Musheer Ahmed. I'm the co-founder of the Virtual FinTech Forum, VFF events as it is known now, and also the founder and MD of Finstep Asia. One of our speakers, Terry, is just experiencing a little technical issue because of Zoom events being buggy today. Might be the storm in Hong Kong. Terry, may I ask you to just switch off your video and then switch it back on? That usually works for us.
Okay, let me try.
Voila, magic.
Okay.
Right? The good old trick of switching off and switching on always works in most electronic items and softwares, so to keep in mind. So onwards into the panel. Firstly, to all of our audience who stayed through the day since 10 a.m. this morning Hong Kong time to now we're at close to 6:30. So thank you for staying through. We've had tremendous response due to the wonderful insights our thought leaders have been providing. Over 1.3 million cumulative views. So I want to thank everybody who's done this, especially my team who has been working quite hard towards it. Our big shout out to our supporters and sponsors, Invest Hong Kong and Start Me Up HK Festival, along with Amazon Web Services, plus our supporting partners, Hong Kong U FinTech and SCF FinTech Academy and Hyperglade, who incidentally have helped us issue a sustainability-linked NFT, which is looking at the carbon footprint of each city. So all the delegates who registered will be getting a complimentary NFT post the event. So watch out in your mailboxes for that. Now, without further ado, I want to jump into the topic. Right today, for the last panel, we'll be discussing on a very important key topic that has come up in the last 2 years, but something that has an impact on our existence, as it were, and more stark as we see climate impact increase. So the topic is on about sustainable finance and how FinTech can enable green finance, right? FinTech for ESG and sustainability is a key theme of our event. So we will be having 4 industry leaders distinguished in their own spheres who will be taking us through different elements of how FinTech can actually enable green finance and make that transformation possible for a sustainable planet for all of us to the maximum possible, right? So I would now request our panelists to kindly introduce themselves, starting with Shinshu, please.
Thank you, Musheer. Ahmed, I'm sorry. So I'm a managing director and a partner based in Hong Kong with the Boston Consulting Group. So I have been working with financial services for more than 20 years. In particular, in recent years, I've been leading the technology and digital advantage practice area in Greater China with BCG. So we have a lot of hands-on experience with FinTech as well, green financing. So very happy to be here, talk about all of these, I think, quite innovative questions.
Thank you. Aiaze?
Yes, thanks, Musheer, and hi, everyone. A pleasure to be here. My name is Aiaze. I've been in the FinTech space for the past 20 years. I've been focusing more heavily on the nexus of FinTech and sustainable development in the past 6 to 7 years. And I am currently with the United Nations, both UNDP and UNCDF, leading a global program on digital finance and FinTech innovations and the SDGs. So we look at different ways in which FinTech innovations can have accelerating effects and impacts on social, economic, and environmental SDGs. And I am strongly focusing on the environmental side, which is going to be very interesting to discuss today with you. So happy to be here. Thanks, Musheer.
Thank you very much. David, on to you.
Hi, Musheer. Thanks for having me. First, I hope that everybody stays safe. I heard that Hong Kong is under the typhoon, so important to be said. My name is David Pardo.
I'm based really quickly overnight, so
yeah, I know. I saw the recent announcement, so that's good news. Yeah, my name is David Pardo. I'm based in Singapore. I've been also around 20 years, earlier stage, working in scale-ups, in product and operational role. I then moved into building my own startups of tech platforms, and I've been a sustainability consultant for the last 4 years. I've recently joined Moody's earlier this year to build a startup engagement program specifically focused on ESG and sustainability.
Thank you, David. And last but definitely not least, Terry.
Hi, everyone. I'm Terry, based in Hong Kong. I am with Cogo as a business development manager of Asia. And Cogo is on a mission to empower hundreds and millions of individuals and business worldwide to understand, reduce, and offset their impact on the planet through their banking partners. And our behavioral science-backed insights and nudging drive actions, which is the sole and very important pillar of Cogo. We deliver actions, not only encourage them to commit to climate actions, but also driving them to adopt sustainable finances, products, and also green services as well. I'm very glad to be here with a very strong panelists, and hoping that we will have some very useful and insightful sharing in the coming half an hour. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you, for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to dive into the theme, right? Green finance has been around for a while, nothing new, but we've seen this shift where not only sovereigns, but companies and large organizations are focusing on it. And we're now seeing regulators also looking at that space as well. So in your opinion and what you're seeing in your fields and across, if each of you could share your thoughts on why has this increase happened in the recent few years, what has been driving that? Yeah, that's probably where we can start off with. How about we start with Shin?
Absolutely. From what we can see in the industry, I think probably the primary driver for all of the the rise in green finance is regulator. So many of the companies that I've been working with, the first motivation is definitely the regulation. So the awareness, and everything, the new regulation that we need to be compliant with. But on top of that, I also noticed that in particular in the leadership, in particular in the current generation of the leadership in many of the large companies, the leaders started to be more and more conscious about the green concept as well as the ESG concept, in large sense. Therefore, I do see a lot of corporate leaders started to embed the green financing, green investment, as well as ESG in the day-to-day operation. So it goes beyond, for example, just the offset of carbon emission. It goes into how can we make the day-to-day operation, how can we make our work, our product more green. And also there are a lot of ideas coming up, from there. Little by little, I start also to see the rising consciousness in, I would say, in consumers. It's coming. It's probably not the biggest driver, but it is coming. So people, for example, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in some of the large cities in mainland China, we do see, in particular, the younger generation becomes more aware about how important to preserve, the nature, and also to have a more greener life. Even, for example, in BCG, as of today, I guess many of the panelists have a life as consultant. Consultants have to travel a lot. So here we promote the green way of traveling, and that's the way for us to change the world from a macro perspective.
Thank you, Shin. I'll now ask Aiaze for his view on the same topic, please.
Yeah, thanks, Musheer. So I'll actually emphasize a couple of points that were mentioned by Chin. I think, first of all, there's, of course, a central importance of political processes. And obviously, the Paris Agreement is one clear manifestation of how important those political processes are globally to really drive that change and that transition towards greener finance, in a sense, and environmental outcomes. I guess the public engagement part and the raising awareness is, I think, something really, really important. I don't think sustainable finance and green finance can scale in the long term without substantial public engagement. And there's a raising awareness amongst people around the impact of nature, impact or the contribution of nature and the impact on nature of the buildings we live in, the digital gadgets that we use, how our pension funds are being invested and where they get invested, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that awareness and that sort of really growing engagement of the wider public, particularly in relation to climate change and biodiversity, is something that's really pushing the needle and pushing the agenda in terms of how quickly we're going to be transitioning towards green finance, because policymakers are responding to this, a number of activist groups are responding to this, and of course corporates as a result are also starting to respond to this. So I think all this combination of different forces, from political forces to changing corporate sensitivity around the topic, and a major, I would say, awareness in the public domain and major public engagement processes are really driving the transition and accelerating this.
Thanks. We got two views of how things have evolved. Terry, coming to you, how do you see, like, leaving out Cogo, but from a personal experience as well, why has green finance picked up? What do you feel, having been in the field for a while?
Cannot agree with my panelists, fellow panelists more. As we are seeing in Hong Kong, just the past 6 months, we have banks offering green loans, green mortgage, green credit cards, and also and even green incentive program, working with others commercial green retailers as well. So we are quite obvious that consumer, their daily spending are now taking into a very dominant pictures of a lot of banks and commercial entities as well. And the other observations we can see is SME. So Scope 3 is now getting more important in the reporting of corporations, and their SME suppliers are now getting into these sustainability reporting pictures as well. So a lot of SME is now looking for solutions that can automate and also record and monitor their own carbon performance in a way that they want to have a minimal investment, have a recognized and comparable result to present to their investors as well as their buyers as well. So consumer and SME is quite neglected in the past few years, but now coming into pictures in the sustainable economy. So we are hoping that now the corporate is dominant in taking all these reporting and also TCFD, but in the future we believe that these two upcoming sectors will contribute a lot in this landscape too.
Thanks, Terry. David, from your perspective, how have things evolved? What do you feel, in addition to what we've heard, anything else that stands out for the drive for prominence?
Yeah, I'd agree with my co-panelist as well. I think the one that I've seen also is COVID as an accelerator, I guess, more at the personal level, particularly in younger generation where there's a lot of soul searching going on, particularly when we work from home and are remote in our organizations. It's been an acceleration, at least in networks, of people try to basically move towards something that has a bit of a mission and purpose-led with their corporate life or with their work-life balance and stuff like that. And so I do think it has been, at least in Asia, a key accelerator in the last few years.
Thank you, David. Moving on to the next question. Now we've looked at green finance, and now the topic is about how technology and fintech can actually, increase that prominence. So looking at the key technologies that are being adopted in green finance lifecycle, as you have an experience in working with that, both at the UNDP and other UN organizations, but also over the last few years. So would you want to highlight some of the key technologies that are being adopted in the green finance lifecycle?
Sure. This is a very broad question, and we don't have so much time. But I guess a useful way of looking at it would be to say there's a huge demand out there for carbon offsets on one hand, and there's a huge surge of innovation in the nature space for nature-based solutions for carbon offsetting. And so technology is sort of a very helpful bridge between these two worlds in a sense. And so in that space, you see a lot of use of technology for creating innovative financial instruments for how to better invest in nature. We see that happening with a number of nature-backed security tokens or nature-backed digital assets. We see a lot of work around the tokenization and securitization of the value of ecosystem services delivered by nature. And so I would say there's a whole range of innovation in the DLT space in how do you actually provide investable financial instruments and securities to the financial community to invest in ecosystem services and funding those ecosystem services. So that would be sort of one area. There's of course a lot of innovation in the NFT space to be able to mobilize capital and deploy capital towards nature conservation efforts. And then of course, all of that, in addition to financial instruments, will require proper monitoring, reporting, and verification of impact. And so there's a whole range of innovation also happening in the digital MRV space, so to speak, in terms of using GPS devices to track specific species, in terms of using satellite imagery to track specific species and ecosystems, in terms of the use of IoT and connected devices, remote sensing technologies, of course, all sorts of sound scrapers and soil scanners. And by sound scrapers, I mean general acoustic technologies, all of that combined with the use of artificial intelligence to be able to properly monitor the impact of mitigation activities and be able to report them back, get third-party certification, and get some sort of equivalence in terms of carbon credits. I would say both in terms of innovative financial instruments, but also in terms of the monitoring, reporting, and verification, there's a whole range of technologies being used. Maybe the last thing that's sort of really interesting now, if I have a few more seconds, is that now we're starting to also see new developments in Web3 and in the metaverse. Because one of the things that the metaverse is actually starting to pick up on is how do you actually connect the physical world to the virtual world in many different ways. And one could imagine all sorts of things. One example is in the gaming space, where you have now new ventures at the nexus of gaming and nature that engage online communities of gamers to actually start solving nature-related problems and biodiversity conservation problems. And what they do online in the virtual world, in the metaverse, gets then translated into real-world action and changes into the real world through investments made from the profits generated from in-game transactions. So this is just sort of the beginning of the trend, but we see also the metaverse and Web3 in a way playing an increasingly important role potentially in the future. We need to obviously drive this, but these are sort of the range of technologies that we are starting to see being involved now at this point.
Thanks, Aiaze. Shin, in your perspective, what are the key technologies that you have seen and also dealing with in the space?
Mm-hmm. I would like to probably take a view from the application perspective. So when we try to tackle the issues around or the development around green financing and all the relevant investment infrastructure issues, we have seen a number of key problems which makes the industry not yet mature. So probably the very first thing you have probably seen that in many other spaces around how can you identify and how can you certify a green assets, like how can you prove that what you are doing is actually produce the offset of carbon emission. So that's very simple question and a very basic question, and that's probably the basics to create a assets, for further investment, for exchanges, etc., etc. So probably the very first question to solve is around identify and certify. And secondarily, when we get further into the investment space, a lot of, I would say, real issues or doubt are around. For example, if there is a forest counted as an offset of carbon emission, for example, in Malaysia, how can we ensure that it is not double counted for two investors around the world? How can we ensure that one single asset is only registered for once and only sold for once? So I guess that's one other issue we need to tackle in the whole value chain. And of course, each investor, for example, if they want to buy, quota to offset the carbon emission, usually they come from different purpose. Some are more from, for example, the real offset purpose they want to buy. It's the role of treasury. Some else rather play a role of probably PR, marketing. So how to make sure that for one particular asset, different buyers with different purpose will pay the same price, hence the transparency, to define the price of a single asset. So these are very pragmatic questions and scenarios that we have encountered when we help our client to build up infrastructure for green financing and green investment as well. So I think all the technology which can help us tackle this issue can be applied. So namely, for example, IoT, blockchain, big data, as well as AI. So all of the technology can actually help us when physical check, physical certification is required, but then technology can probably enable and facilitate that. So I think when we talk about the technology supporting all the green finance in broad sense, we probably need to think more from the application, the use case perspective.
Yeah, it's a good combination, right? As talked about the technologies and talking about the application, the BIS Innovation Hub for Hong Kong, where I'm a consultant handling the project on green finance. What we have done last year was to tokenize green bonds, but this year we're actually using smart contracts and blockchain with IoT to track green projects output, and then also use the smart contracts for issuance of carbon credits, mitigation outcomes as they are known, right? So there is that they're doing POCs now, and hopefully there's going to be more mainstream applications in the coming years. And taking that forward, right? How are we seeing FinTech play a role in this, right? Is it driven by startups, or are large corporates also deploying tech? Terry, your views on that? How's Cogo been handling that?
Sure. Yes. Cogo is definitely hoping to play a important role in contributing the green environment and also green economy, because we believe that as a climate tech or climate FinTech, we want to facilitating and helping the corporates or financial institute to roadmapping their developments of green economy, and that will be our ultimate goal. And I believe that should be the ultimate goal of all the FinTech players in the ecosystem. And we want to increase the carbon literacy to make sure people, top leaders, government officials understand what is about the carbon impact, what is that equalization means to them, what is the meaning of flying a trip to one city to another, and helping them to quantify this kind of impact and make them understand. And when I was also looking at the TCFD framework, I understand that it's also a highly important role of governance in the corporation, and of course that means the people in this organization, they need to understand that they need to be able to set appropriate policies, and this kind of understanding will be you will need times and also a lot of engagement, a lot of education, and I believe FinTech will be able to play that in that role, because that FinTech is always easy to approach, easy to understand, and also is accessing to everybody daily. So with that, I believe the governance and factors will be one of the key contributions of how fintech can help with the development of green finance, and of course about all the others technology that my fellow panelists mentioned. AI, machine learning, blockchain is already taking shape in these sectors. I believe that is also one of those important points that the technology is trying to helping the deliverables in the green finance ecosystem.
I was coming back to you, right, on top of what Terry's added and what Shin was mentioning as well. Any use cases that you've seen in the last few years? In our previous conversation, we've had a couple of use cases that I love, especially the elephant as we were looking at in terms of tokenization, but would love to hear some of those from you.
Yeah, of course. I mean, so you're asking a fintech person. So first of all, I'd be very biased in terms of the role that fintech plays, right? I mean, fintech is playing a significant role. And before getting into the elephant use case, if you just look at sort of how global card networks, for instance, are trying to engage their users with the carbon content of their transactions, with the plastic content of their transactions, with the water usage content of their transactions, they obviously rely on fintech partners to be able to deliver that. When you look at the way in which financial institutions are trying to now include nature-related risks and nature exposure of their investments into the financial decision-making processes, they're relying on fintech platforms to be able to actually do that for them. So in many ways, I would say fintech is playing a significant role, but of course, fintech needs a marketplace and they need the financial sector to start engaging with them to be able to direct and channel greener finance towards nature and towards climate. And so fintech is obviously a key component of the solution. There's a lot of other examples that are really more organically fintech. When you think of nature markets and how to build nature markets, and in particular, for instance, in the conservation space, if you're thinking about, as you were referring to, the conservation of, for instance, elephant herds in West Africa, one can think about ways in which you can measure the ecosystem services rendered by these elephants from, as a biomass themselves, but from the ways in which they actually fertilize the ground, from the way in which they maintain the savanna by eating the acacia trees and leaving space for larger trees to grow, and all sorts of other things that elephants do. There's ways in which you can start thinking about valuing this, tokenizing it and securitizing it on the blockchain so that you can start creating a market for corporates and financial institutions, but also individuals to buy into these tokens. And the proceeds of the tokens can then be reinvested into projects that really strengthen local communities, engage them, onboard them as agents of conservation, but also really pay for conservation efforts in conserving and restoring the elephant herd. So those kind of models are starting to emerge. And of course, they rely on a range of technologies, as I mentioned before, from blockchain to MRV systems, but they rely on fintech startups that are independent and that are able to build a solution for that market to start emerging. So there's a lot of, in the context of nature markets in a broad sense, with the supply side of money and the demand side of money, there will be a lot of fintech platforms in between actually building those solutions to really connect money to nature-based solutions, as I was saying before. And this is a space where fintechs will be playing a significant role in actually making this happen. So yes, definitely there's a centrality of the role of fintechs in that space, and in particular in creating those very complex markets in a sense.
Thanks, Aiaze. And look, I think blockchain keeps coming back as one of the key elements. Lastly, and I think I want to distinguish here in terms of speculative crypto or digital assets was the use of the underlying technology, which is what we're all talking about, right? Versus other applications, legit and otherwise, right? David,
Absolutely.
Your views on the use of blockchain, carbon markets, or in general, how has the carbon markets grown, including blockchain-based carbon markets like ACX, etc.? How can fintech support?
Thanks for the question, Musheer. So for me, it starts with the issues at hand, right? I think we're all kind of well versed into the debate that is going on around carbon markets specifically, and the polemical debate around that, right? So the first thing is trust. We're talking about, establishing systems of no fraud, make sure that the projects are real, make sure, to Tin's point earlier, that the double counting is essentially measured and managed. All those things are things that were So that's one of the issues. The second that I kind of foresee in the space is the supply and process specifically around carbon is too small to satisfy the ambitions that we'd have to have true carbon offsetting of the large majority of the large polluters. To a certain extent, I think technology can offer some solutions to those issues. So of course, double counting and global ledger that is transparent, that people can kind of refer to, that would be collaborative and essentially open by default, should help us essentially create the transparency and the reliability that the market itself requires for some of the double counting issues that we have seen. In my mind, that goes without saying that technology has to be going hand in hand with something else, which is the credibility of the players, the transparency and the trustworthiness of the players going into the market, both on buyer side, on management of the blockchain, on awareness, on validation, on the technology reliability. Specifically, we're looking at a lot of new methodology to come online to validate some of those carbon projects around real-time data and stuff like that. A lot of the debates that has been around wildfire, well, yes, what do we do if some of those projects that were bought in the first instance went literally into flame and smoke, right? And so we haven't considered for some of those use cases to essentially come online. We're now at the stage where the technology kind of approach not only blockchains, but generally the visibility that we should have on those projects and the assessments of the project themselves should help us understand and build a better future for the carbon markets exchange programs generally and the marketplaces, so that we have real tangibility and real trustworthiness within the market. Otherwise, the risk is that this market is only going to be a representation of something fraudulent or hot air. And I'm worried about that.
Yeah, we don't need too much hot air in general, literally as well, right? Shin, coming back to you, we actually, this conversation started with you talking about carbon markets and blockchain, but I want to hear from you, adding to what David has mentioned in particular about the carbon markets. We are seeing a lot of efforts to, let me use the term digitalize, right? Carbon markets, from even if you drop out blockchain, many of the exchanges are looking to use that. And there are other means of chasing the carbon markets. We just saw, European carbon credits crossing 100 euros for the first time recently. So we are seeing that moves in terms of value where people are trying to look at this carbon credits as a market, but in terms of the value of the market. I would love to know your thoughts on what is the key elements to be considered from a technology perspective for these carbon markets, and what use cases do you see besides what we've discussed?
So our team have done a very interesting forecast about the carbon market. So we try to adopt, different scenarios of 1.5 degree and 2 degree, and we try to forecast how much, for example, if we want to reach the target of 1.5, how much carbon offset is required given the current status, and how much will be available as supply on the market. So the result in brief is that we do see a pretty important gap between the supply and demand, meaning there is less available carbon assets on the market to be sold to achieve that offset target. And so we started to think around that. Basically, one way to create supply and also to match with the demand is probably to create a market where we can make all the possible assets, transferable between different markets. And actually, blockchain is a very good tool to digitalize different assets in the, assets lifecycle management. I think as of today, people have consensus that by using blockchain, you can probably convert one of the assets from one exchanges or one place, and then place it on the other market where you can find the supply, the demand, sorry. So basically, blockchain would be one useful tool to help fill in the gap. And on the other side, I quite agree with David, all the things that he has mentioned around certification, around anti-fraud and everything. I mean, blockchain has significant use cases around that. But on the other side, I personally also admit that given the technology is of today, there are still limitations. So if the trading, for example, if we take carbon trading as an example, if the trading frequency and volume goes up very quickly, will the current technology be able to support that frequency? I guess that's still one open question. Yeah.
Thanks. Look, this has been so insightful. We're having different viewpoints. We're looking at how United Nations looks at it. We're looking at how each of you have experience in terms of the industry applications, as well as what startups are doing in it. And I think that's the most we could probably achieve in a 35 minutes to 40-minute panel. So what I'm going to do is I am going to throw the last question to all of you in terms of if we had to expect what FinTech could do in the green finance space in the coming 5 years, what would be your major expectations? Maybe your top 2 expectations per speaker, and and then we can wrap up after that. David, let's start with you.
The top 2 is very difficult, Musheer. I had a long list, so apologies for that.
Okay, I'll give you 3. Let's go with 3 then. Yeah, one.
No, I'll try to stick with the brief. So I think the first one that I would say is specifically on connectivity. So in my mind is, look, we can't solve this problem by ourselves. I feel the supply chain itself, we're all oriented towards the same goal of having a very large collaboration mesh network of data sharing for ESG assessments generally, but have visibility on all of the supply chains. It's going to be dependent and demanded by some regulation. And in my mind, I think that's probably a foresight that we have to kind of prepare for, is to essentially have some way of monetizing this thing. But even if it's not fully monetized, it's going to be through collaborations of efforts of data connectivity to essentially make sure that we understand how our supply chain are connected. And not only that, but the players and or the products and transactions as part of that supply chain and how they contribute to have a better view of our world, right? Specifically around carbon and social impacts and stuff. That would be my first one. The second one is I have a big dream, I guess, on try to essentially offer, I guess, substitutes to most of our products. I feel like at the moment it's a choice of weak solutions, in the sense that we always have to debate if it's a carbon price that needs to be included to essentially offer substitutes that are competitive. Is it going to be through carbon tax or something else? In my mind is I would like to kind of see a space where we end up where we always have a choice between options that are fully sustainable, that are fully tracked, and some that are not, and ideally with a price parity. And then we'll see how fast we can accelerate our true transformation towards sustainability. So that would be most of my 2 biggest points, I guess.
I'm going to come. I want to ask one more thing from you, because we had planned it, and I'll take that minute extra, and hopefully all the other speakers are fine on time. Is if you could pick one major gap that we see in green finance, like green fintech, when it comes to enabling that, right? What would you say?
I actually don't think it's a technical gap. I think it's probably more a collaboration gap. At the moment, we're trying to compete a lot on some of those things to try to find monetization path. My assumption is at the end of the day, we are going to have to, because nobody can address the supply chain question by themselves. And so in my mind is, why don't we accept that fact and start to actually accelerate more collaborations around data sharing generally? So that would be the main gap in my mind.
Thank you. Terry, over to you. 2 things that you feel are the future of fintech in green finance, please.
Yeah, I believe the biggest enemy we have at this moment is inactions. So I hopefully in 5 years time, everybody will be carbon conscious or green conscious. So every decision they are making will be well informed with their carbon impact or climate impact in purchase, daily life, even commercial, of course. And that will be my dream, and collective action, just as David mentioned, is the key. No one can tackle this problem alone. We need everyone, big guys, small guys, individuals, government to work together. And I believe that with the regulations is now getting in place, and technologically we are also getting there as well. And hopefully carbon literacy in the coming 5 years will improve as well. So by that time, I'm quite sure that we will see the light in the end of the tunnel.
Thanks, Terry. Shin, coming over to you. What are your 2 picks for future of green fintech?
I will probably come with just the one because the other panelists have already, said a lot of good things. I think the real efficiency. I mean, given the the development of fintech over the last few years, I have been observing the industry very closely. So I think one thing we need to address for the industry to be sustainable is probably create real value. And what I see is, for the whole green finance business, it is important to have the solutions address the real issue, different frictions over different markets to quantify unquantifiable things. So I guess a lot of issues is around creating pragmatic solutions and create value, and only by that we can build up a real market. So I guess that's my expected value creation for green green fintech.
Thanks. As I'm going to give you the closing statement, as it were. What's your view on where green fintech lies?
That's a lot of responsibility. But listen, since my comments were essentially on nature, I'll give a slightly broader ESG perspective. I think one is there's a huge need for automating disclosures and ESG disclosures and reporting for MSMEs around the world. We know how important MSMEs are to our world economy, and we know how costly and expensive and cumbersome ESG disclosures and reporting are. And so I think fintechs focusing on automating those disclosures and the reporting will really go a long way in unlocking finance for MSMEs. That's one important area. I think the whole discoverability issue, discovering green investment opportunities and matchmaking between investors and opportunities is going to be a key area. And the last one is coming back to the elephant thing. I think every fintech has an opportunity to actually really sensitize their audiences and their customer base and build awareness by really bringing the real world and nature and biodiversity into their user experiences in ways that help their users connect with the real world and with nature in new ways, in a more personal way. And each one of these fintechs has an opportunity to actually really then drive actual real world action from that engagement. So I would say I would really invite all the fintechs to take this at heart and make those connections, build that awareness, and really drive real world impact from their businesses and how they can engage their online audiences.
Perfect. My view on this is the future of green is blue, in the sense that there is, we don't really talk about blue finance and blue fintech, but that is something that will play a big role. Water and the ocean is a major factor in regulating temperature, as we've heard, and we are seeing methods on how that could be possibly pushed. So thank you so much, all 4 of you. Very, very insightful. I learned a lot today, and I hope our audience also have gained some tremendous insights. So thank you, Shin, David, Terry, and Aiaze for this contribution to VFF 2022. And I take this opportunity, thank you. I take this opportunity to firstly thank our wonderful audience, not just in Hong Kong. We've had 60 plus countries, audiences joining us from 60 plus countries, including a tremendous response from mainland China, where we've reached almost 1.4 million cumulative views for the event today. So beyond our wildest dreams in terms of expectations, so very delighted. Of course, the event's big heart was the support we got from our main sponsors, platinum sponsors, which is Invest Hong Kong and Start Me Up HK Festival, and then our bronze sponsors, AWS Hong Kong, of course, with the support of Hong Kong U FinTech and Hong Kong U SCF FinTech Academy and Hyperglade, who are our NFT partners. I would also want to take the opportunity to thank all of our other media partners, our community partners, and most importantly for me personally is my co-founder, Sherry Shi from Nastria Media, who has been a pillar and been the main driving force for this event. Our team has been tremendous. Vineet, Angel, Asim, Natalie, Anastasia, Ruby, I may be missing a few names, Clarice, Mokshita, and everybody else has put in tremendous effort in putting us through, and I appreciate all they have done. But thanks once again, everyone. And we will be following up with more details on recorded sessions for everybody to view post the event, and look forward to you engaging with VFF events. So good night and take care.